Okay, so Willoughby is the next cheese that we're going to try. And this is a sister cheese to Harbison. They're made in the same creamery from the same milk source. And they're both, the process is really similar and they end up with a very similar texture. But as you can see, the Willoughby, we dialed down the moisture content a little bit so that it doesn't need that spruce bark to hold it up straight. It's usually able to stand up on its own. Although I do like an extra ripe Willoughby that's starting to sort of crack at the edges and give way. That's a good sign for me. I have a Willoughby in front of me. I'll get the crinkles out of here, sorry. That is a little bit young. That's a good sign from where I'm standing, which means we're keeping up with sales, but sometimes it's hard for me to wrangle a perfectly ripe piece because we try to get them out into the world before they reach that point. So this looks very pillowy. It looks almost bloomy. There's some white flora on the surface of the cheese, which is not unusual. But the main difference, besides it being a little less soft than the Harbison here, is that it's a washed rind cheese. So we're literally, instead of allowing that white flora, which is all over our caves, it's ever present. Even if we didn't inoculate the milk, it's going to grow on whatever cheese is in those caves. It's a very ubiquitous and aggressive rind colonizer, and thankfully it's beautiful too. But for the wash rind cheeses, we're actively trying to discourage the flora, the white fluff, the vertical growing things, and encourage a community of microbes that are sticky and kind of tacky and orange, and they can range in color from peachy to almost like hot pink. And the flavor profile, instead of going in that mushroomy vegetal direction like a bloomy rind will, the wash rind family, this is like the stinky cheese family. So think French Epoisse or Limburger from like Bavaria. Really, we think of it from being from Wisconsin, where those traditions landed. The aroma of the cheese from the outside on the rind is very earthy, almost like suede. You get like clean barn aromas, so a little animally. And it's it doesn't always remind us of a food smell. Maybe roasted meat, especially lamb or goat, something like that. This is a cow's milk cheese. So when you on the palate though, the flavors tend to be much more mellow and less assertive than on the nose. So we like to say the bark is worse than the bite. You might not think you're going to enjoy it from what it smells like when you're just unwrapping it. But like I said, on the palate, you pick up more peachy, fruity cream notes, and those animally flavors come across oftentimes more as like very pleasant cured meat, like prosciutto or speck, smoky cured meat flavors. This is also a pasteurized cheese, and it's on the milder side, depending on the ripeness.
So Gillian, we chose the Shiraz. We want to talk about that?
We are now in the Southern Hemisphere. So Stag's Leap Winery is in Napa Valley. Penfolds is located in South Australia, just outside of Adelaide. Winery that's been producing amazing wine since 1844. When Dr. Penfolds moved over from the UK and established a medical practice. He actually started in the wine business by making medicinal tinctures out of wine, fortifying wine juice and curing all kinds of things, insomnia, dysentery, you name it. People were coming over on long ship journeys. So these medical tinctures actually made Dr. Penfolds quite famous. Fast forward to the 1950s, where we see a transition from the fortified sweet sticky stuff into still red wine production. Part of that was the purchase of the Kalimna vineyard. So this is our Kalimna Shiraz. We're now sourcing from different locations, Barossa Valley being the main primary source, and the Kalimna vineyard is located within the Barossa Valley. It's home to some of the oldest Cabernet Sauvignon vines in the world because phylloxera never made it to that part of the Barossa Valley. So we have ungrafted 150-year-old Cabernet Sauvignon there. But what I find to be some really cool similarities between this variety and the Willoughby is that that meaty note, right? Shiraz definitely has a kind of a peppery, somewhat camphor or eucalyptus type of aromatic, also very savory. And I think that that really plays to the Willoughby cheese quite well. Those savory, almost like kind of black olive characteristics too. We don't use a lot of new oak on this wine. There is some old American oak hogshead barrels that this wine is fermented in that to me give, again, just a slight kind of greenish, maybe like a dill type of aroma and flavor profile. But I think really honing in on that, the kind of the meaty, savory characteristics of the Shiraz when pairing with the Willoughby is pretty phenomenal.
You know, with typically the Rhine can have some real robust flavors to it. And this has a nice balance to the flavor of the Rhine. And the wine does not overpower. There's a nice balance between that. What do you think, Zoe?
Yes, I was skeptical to be honest, because my wheel especially is on the young side, and so it's not as assertive as it could be. And then I think of Shiraz like those spicy notes being more bold, so I didn't think it would be a good intensity match, but actually they held their own with each other rather nicely. And I love the, as you were saying, like briny olive, black olive, and dill. Those really jumped out to me as I was tasting along. I thought it really punched up the suede characteristic of the cheese. I got that like earthy animal note in a very pleasant way. Whereas on the palate, I wasn't noticing that as much before I tried it with the wine. So pleasantly surprised. Thumbs up.
Nice. Pauline, tell us about your chocolate.
Yes, so for this one, we selected Guanaja, 70% chocolate, which is our same iconic dark chocolate from Valrhona. So this one is a blend of more than 7 different origins of cocoa, meaning we will have a very complex profile. So at the beginning of the testing, we have a little bit of acidity, some fruity notes, and then going for more toasted, roasted cocoa, which is named cocoa nibs. And we can say an elegant bitterness that will last after taste. And so with this cheese, it was very interesting because it gives also a complex pairing, because we have the buttery notes of the cheese that will contrast with the strong cocoa notes of the chocolate. But on the other side, we will have the peat and roasted meat from the cheese you mentioned that are going along with the nibs and toasted cocoa from the chocolate. And you mentioned it for the wine as well. It enhances the camphor notes, so the black olives notes we can have from the chocolate as well. So bringing a little bit of freshness as well. So it's really balanced between similarities of some notes and contrast on some other. And with the wine, I will say it brings a little bit more complexity to this pairing, but still going along with the notes of cocoa and of nibs. So yeah, interesting one and a complex pairing, I will say.
This is fantastic. The chocolate brings like a dark cherry to everything.
Yeah.
So with the cheese, you get butter and cherry, and with the wine, you get the dark fruit and the cherry, and then you put them together and you get butter, chocolate, and the fruit together. And that's just fantastic. It's just, Gillian, what's your input?
Yeah, I just, I want to say I've loved Valrhona chocolate for so many years, and these bars really do serve as a reminder of just the quality, right? And I before I tasted the wine, I kind of let chocolate sort of sit on my palate, warm up a little bit, and just kind of melt.
Exactly.
And really got so many more nuances and complexities out of it that way. But then when I tried the wine too, I feel like it brought out more of the fruit, more of the fruitiness of the wine, whereas the cheese kind of coasted alongside in terms of picking up all the savory stuff. But then you're right, Michael, you put it all together and it's a pretty awesome combination.
Zoe?
All right. You took my note on like the cherry chocolate, with Willoughby. The chocolate, by the way, is beautiful. 70% can sometimes start to become unpalatable for me because it can be, bitter or astringent, almost like tannic. And this is very smooth, very palatable, just easy to eat all by itself. And with the cheese, it really changed the cheese compared to what was happening with just the wine. So it was brought in my mind to those like little cordial cherry truffles that you get at the holidays, where they're
Exactly.
dark chocolate with the little maraschino in the middle. And it punched up the fruit of the wine. And it really took the whole experience away from the briny olive direction. And that camphor note came through almost as just like a minty impression from the combination of all three. So I thought it was successful. Again, the intensities melded well. I would say the cheese was in a supporting role with all three, for better or worse. You maybe don't want the washed rind character of the cheese to be dominant when you're trying it with the chocolate and the wine. So I think in a good way, the cheese sort of laid back a little bit and just added a creamy depth to tie things together.
I think that those that are hesitant of using a washed rind cheese, this is a good example of how it can transform into a supporting character and bring all these flavors together without actually sticking its nose in and being overpowering. It's a nice balance. It really brought, I got so much better out of it. And really, the structure, without the structure, it wouldn't have stood up to these flavors. If you would have had something that was more buttery and less strong, it would have they would have just run it over and we wouldn't have tasted it. So that's my thought on it. Pauline?
Yeah, I totally agree with all of you, we can say. Yeah, it's a pairing, as you said, with a lot of structure from the cheese, from the wine, and from the chocolate.
Great. All right. So another really nice pairing. Really enjoyed that